There is not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine.
Our aim on Nuance is to live our faith well unto the Lord in the public square, right? Well, let me tell you about the various public squares or plazas in Kansas City, Missouri, the home of today's guest. There's Country Club Plaza, sometimes just simply called The Plaza, Kansas City's most famous shopping, dining, and entertainment district. With Spanish-inspired architecture, fountains, and regular events, it's a must-visit for locals and tourists alike. Then there's Barney Alice Plaza, a public square in downtown Kansas City right across from the Municipal Auditorium near the Convention Center. It hosts concerts, festivals, and other community events. There's Crown Center Square, part of the Crown Center complex, home to Hallmark Cards headquarters. You know, that little crown logo you'll see on your greeting cards. Well, this has all sorts of seasonal attractions, ice skating in the winter, festivals in the winter months, warmer months. And then the Power and Light District. Technically a district rather than a single plaza, but it's got a central courtyard that hosts KC Live. It serves as a gathering spot for concerts and such. Now, I don't know if you, our listener, has visited any of these popular places in Kansas City, but our guest certainly has. Today, I'm grateful to have Tom Nelson, a well-seasoned pastor and an excellent voice in the arena of faith and work integration. He's here to share about his new book and his deep well of wisdom on living for Jesus out there in the public square. Tom, welcome. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, Case, it's a delight to be with you. And thanks for highlighting Kansas City right now. Anyway, the Chiefs are a pretty big deal here.
Well, you know, I wonder, we're recording this before the Super Bowl. It will land afterwards, but I imagine the Chiefs are your prediction?
Of course.
Of
we're
course.
all going for the three-peat, but the city has been electric. We've actually been spoiled for years. I mean, 7 championship. Anyway, so it's amazing.
Oh,
but
good night.
Thank you for highlighting Kansas City. It's great.
I don't have a team in the match, but I will be supporting the Chiefs as well, you know, just to see Taylor all excited. Now, I'm curious, if any of those plazas and squares I mentioned, any of those your favorite or preferred place to be?
Yes, the Country Club Plaza has all kinds of memories. Liz and I have in our marriage, who've been here a long time, and special times, special holidays, special Valentines. The Country Club Plaza is a beautiful place. And so, yeah, we have lots of memories. Country Club Plaza, that's my favorite.
Well, I've only come to Kansas City actually to visit you and Made to Flourish. And it was in the dead of winter, both of those times, pretty miserable.
Yes. Yeah, we do have a winter right now. This is January's been a hard winter, and February doesn't look too great right now.
Well, to our viewers and friends, welcome to Nuance, where we seek to be faithful in the public square. I'm Case Thorpe, and want to encourage you, like, subscribe, share. Our numbers have really been growing, and when you do that, it helps us to get this good news and solid theology out even further. Well, so a bit about Tom Nelson. He's an award-winning author and speaker who started Christ Community Church, a multi-site congregation in Kansas City. He also founded and serves as executive chairman of Made to Flourish, a national nonprofit that helps church leaders get equipped for people every day, day-to-day life at work and in the economy. Tom is one of the founding council members of the Gospel Coalition and used to be on the leadership team of the Oikonomia Network. He's the author of several books, and his latest one to release soon is Why Your Work Matters from Brazos Press. Tom and his wife, Liz, live in Leawood, Kansas, and they have 2 grown children. So, Tom, what did I miss? What do you want people to know about you?
The biggest thing is we now have a granddaughter. So that's very, very cool. But no, thank you for that kind introduction. Yeah, it's great to be with you.
Is she your first and only granddaughter?
Yes, she's my first and only at this point. And I guess grandparents are supposed to have nicknames. I'm Pops.
Pops. Okay, what's Liz called?
Nellie. Nellie and Pops. Nellie, yeah, because Nelson, I think that's kind of, but Nellie. Pops
okay.
and Nellie.
Pops and Nellie. That's great. That's great. Well, So, Tom, I mean, you have been such a mentor to me through this faith and work conversation. I, for our listeners to know, got to work with Made to Flourish for a number of years. And as we grew the collaborative, I was gleaning both from Redeemer's Center for Faith and Work in New York City and then the Made to Flourish work in Kansas City. And I felt like these two organizations and their leaders were so generous and I just have in mind two pitchers pouring out from those cities down here on little Orlando, Florida. So, in fact, Tom, I don't know if you know that I tell people this, but I describe you as the Tim Keller of the Midwest.
Well, any way you could ascribe Tim Keller to me, that's an honor.
Yeah.
Well, great person.
And of course, he was the Tom Nelson of Manhattan. So
I don't think so. I'm the who's that with the who's who, but that's okay. Tim was a good friend and an amazing leader. We miss him.
Absolutely. There is a hole in the conversation for sure. Well, I wanted you to know, and I want our listeners to know about one of your books, The Economics of Neighborly Love. And Tom, I use this with my Gotham fellows. The other text that was recommended, it just didn't go over as well. And this book, wow, it really helps folks to think about Jesus' call to love our neighbor and where our work and the economy plays into that.
Well, it encourages me. I mean, for all of us, we have our little loaves and fishes, right? They may not be that great, but God can multiply them. And I'm thrilled by the reception of that book.
Well, I'll put that in our show notes for those that are interested. Now, so this latest book to come out, Why Your Work Matters. I understand it's like a refresh, a redo of your first book that came out, yes?
Yeah, it is. I've never done this before, Case, but it is fascinating. Several people came to me and said, Work Matters. That came out in like 2010. I was one of the earlier sort of pastors to write on this. And God used the book in wonderful ways. And there have been many great resources around work since then, even by pastors such as Tim, and Catherine. But I think having been deeply involved in this conversation, Case, for a long time now, and one of the, we trust thought leaders, at least contributors in the national movement, many people came to me and said, we want to redo Work Matters in the sense like we want to take the best of Work Matters and update it. So I actually went with Brazos Press. I love IVP, but we went with Brazos. And the book is about 80% new content, actually. It follows the biblical narrative, which is the best part, I think, of Work Matters, of how, the creation of work, the fall of work, the redemption of work, the consummation of future work, and Jesus a carpenter. So that framing stays. But each of the first 5 chapters are updated with a lot of more thought that I've given to it. And then the last 6 are brand new. And it makes a transition to things like technology and work, seasons of work, burnout, our mission of work on Monday. So it is also designed not primarily for pastors. We hope pastors will love it and give it to their congregation as an equipping tool. But it's really more and more written for that congregant in mind, that thoughtful congregant who wants to really live out their faith on Monday. So we are really hopeful in all the good resources in this conversation that this book will be a foundational one. And that's our hope with Made to Flourish. But we're really hopeful, and we think it's a much better book and more up-to-date book. So we're hopeful it'll be a good contribution.
I've always been moved by the way in which you use the word malpractice. I've heard you describe your early years of pastoral ministry with that particular word, and I think it's just powerful, number one, the word itself, but also the honesty and transparency in how you use it. Would you share with us that story and that journey?
Sure, I would love to. I think it is the right word, at least for me, coming out of my own conviction. But yes, many years ago now, it's over 20-some years ago, I stood before my congregation, and pastors have a hard time making confession. We say confession is good for the soul, but hard for pastors. So I don't know who all your listeners are, but pastors, we're interesting creatures. But I really admitted to my congregation that I had failed them. And usually when a pastor makes a confession, you can hear a pin drop because it's often around, financial malfeasance or moral compromise. But this was a significant failure on my part, and that was a theological impoverishment that led to my pastoral impoverishment. So I said to him, this is not intentional. A lot of malpractice is not intentional, but because of an impoverished theology that profoundly misinformed my pastoral calling and paradigm and equipping focus, that I had spent the majority of my time in the first 10 years or so, 8 years of my pastoral work, the majority of my time equipping God's people for the slimmest minority of their life. I was focused more on how well I did on Sunday than how God's people lived out their faith on Monday. So I call it, in case, the majority minority disparity, that I'd spent the majority of my time equipping God's people, which is to be my calling as a pastor, right? To help their formation, their mission. But I'd spend the smallest amount of time thinking and helping them think and apply God's truth to their majority of their life. So that was malpractice. And I talked about the Sunday to Monday gap and my thinking, because of my impoverished theology and impoverished pastoral paradigm and practice, that was going to change. So we've been in one little space in Kansas City, trying to live in the last 25 years, it probably is now, living more into a more integral theology and a more integral mission that helps connect Sunday to Monday. So yeah, that was the moment.
How did your people receive that confession?
Well, I think the first point would be they were surprised, because I've always taken the scripture seriously. And I believe a big part of a pastoral role, especially a teaching role, is to teach God's word. And many of them knew I'd spent a lot of time studying the scriptures, with education and degrees. And I could see the kind of curious look, like, you mean you missed this? Like, you've been in the Bible. That's your calling, Pastor. So I think at first it was shock, a little bit of shock and awe, but it was a sense like, let me see. So we did an extensive series on a biblical theology of work on a Sunday morning, and it was so riveting and so transformational to me and to our people that really began to help set the change of a trajectory for Christ's community and our focus, our culture, and our mission. Yeah.
I can imagine there might have been some that said, oh, it wasn't money or philandering. It's fine, Tom. It's fine. You're a good guy. And that might have been a little disappointing or frustrating.
Well, yeah, I think some of that case was probably the reality. But I think because our community here, is imperfect, like any local church community, but there's a deep sense of loving God with our mind, heart, and our hands. And I think because there was a deep sense of heart and hands, they took my confession to heart, that I was being authentic and real.
They took it seriously.
They took it seriously. And then they knew that the life of the mind mattered.
Yeah.
And so to think biblically and theologically and handle God's word well was a value. So because of that, it was shocking. It challenged them. But I think they were more like, okay, let's see. Mm-hmm. What do you mean? There was eagerness.
It intrigued people.
When we begin to connect the biblical dots from creation, from Genesis to Revelation, there was a lot of aha moments.
Well, thank you. That I think helps set the table, if you will, and frame for people why these conversations matter. Our podcast is aimed at Christian professionals. And I'm always careful or strategic when I speak with pastors that they make the connections with the dots. And what I love about what you're saying there is not only your theological and biblical convictions, but even you in your own workplace, in your own work context. At the Collaborative, we, being rooted at First Pres Orlando and then launched from there, would often turn the mirror around and go, okay, well, just because we're Christians or in ministry, technically, in the vocational ministry, doesn't mean we've integrated our faith and work and need to do that.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, it's easy for us to be surrounded with God stuff or even studying and talking about God, but not living into the fullness of what it means that he is present. The Spirit empowers us for our work. It's very easy to be Christian deists as pastors, and that's a real tragedy, but it is easy to have that Sunday to Monday gap.
Well, and I see folks who are very intentional about their faith with regular Bible study and worship and growing in the Lord, but yet then never making that jump to,
Yes. And may I just suggest, Case, you know this too, but like, if we understand the biblical theology and a whole life discipleship, and that Jesus wants to be a part of every part of our life, then we understand that our Sunday does matter. We talk about that. The gathered corporate worship space is vital.
Yeah, this movement doesn't diminish that.
No, but the primary place for our worshiping God in what we do and how we love others is Monday, not just Sunday. Or the primary place where we are spiritually formed is Monday, not just Sunday. And the primary place we have a gospel mission. And the common good and loving our neighbor is really Monday more than Sunday. So it's not to minimize Sunday, but to say that whole week God has called us to live whole life discipleship and bring all of Christ and Christian faith into everything we are and think and do.
Mm-hmm. So in the book, Why Your Work Matters, you lean into the issue of Sabbath. And I'm always wanting folks to know that when we talk about Sabbath, we don't mean 1950s, don't buy any liquor and stay at home, don't play baseball. It's more of a biblical understanding. It's really tough to keep even today. So how do you suggest people understand it better and then understand boundaries to meet the demands of modern work?
Yeah, oh, that's such a big and important question. It's an area that I'll just say, it's a little bit of a confession to your listeners and to you. I didn't spend this, even though I was deeply invested in the Torah and the depth of the Hebrew text, I didn't spend enough time thinking about Sabbath. Okay, I've done a lot more thinking and praying and trying to live into it. So I'm just saying, that's an area of regret in my life, and I threw the baby out with the bathwater. So I'm just saying, I am recovering. I am still processing this. It's a really important conversation. I just did a message at our church Sunday on Sabbath. So a couple things I would say. One is that God designed the Sabbath within creation, not as primarily some rule-keeping endeavor, but relational deepening. It's a gift. It's designed to be a gift, not only for us, but for the earth. I mean, I quote a study in my message on Amherst, University of Massachusetts study, that if everybody on the globe, think about this, everybody on the globe took one day off from strong consumption and activity, 30% of the carbon footprint would disappear.
Wow.
So I'm not making any political statement. I'm just saying the biblical design of work and rest, the 6-to-1, the weekly distinct day that is not for efficiency, productivity, but for relationship, right? And for beauty and for slowing down and rest is a brilliant creation design. And of course, it's reinforced in the 10 Commandments. You know, we always say the 10 Commandments aren't 10 suggestions. And the fourth one is not a suggestion. Now, again, it gets lost in the weeds, and that's why we have to be careful it doesn't get cluttered.
Well,
but it's really beautiful.
I don't know if maybe I got this from you, but the idea that if you were a slave in Egypt, as our covenant ancestors, the Jews were, and you are slinging mud bricks 7 days a week, like a Sabbath is a gift. It is countercultural. Like, here is a gift for you to actually rest.
Yes.
Did I get that from you?
It is creational. It's countercultural. And in Mark, for example, in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus, what he doesn't eliminate the Sabbath distinct one day of a week. He reframes it and he addresses the clutter, right, of religious legalism and the suffocation of what it had become. So I do think, first of all, I think we should recover a distinct one day a week. Now, what day that is, and some of our economic well-being, it's a variety for different people. However, I would say for most followers of Jesus, Sunday is probably the best time because the ancient Sabbath was also a communal experience. So as followers of Jesus on the Lord's Day, part of that Sabbath break is corporate worship together. I think it's really important that all of God's people look at their week and look at one day that's distinct, that is different than the rest. And ideally, I think it's Sunday for many. But if that's impossible, I think there's adjustment. Remember, principles are important here, and patterns and pacing. It's not just a rigid template that you have to fit into someone else. Seasons of life will affect it. But I don't think it's just to be spiritualized as an idea. I think there's a creation rhythm of 1 and 6 that we apply to our cultural context, but it will be countercultural. It will require priority changes, lifestyle adjustments. I mean, I'm not minimizing that. When I just did this message, people were going, how do I do this? What's the rhythm in a modern world? So we can talk more about that. But I do think if we care deeply about God's design, we're going to care deeply about our work, paid and unpaid work, and our faith informs that, but also our day of rest. And hopefully, for some and more, a sabbatical, it's an extended deepening period of rest periodically.
And that rest, like you say, is not this legalism. If you don't do it, God's upset. It's a gift of renewal. It is a chance to recharge, and we need that. What would be some of those specifics that you've leaned into, particularly with our phones? Ugh.
Yeah, I've said several things. I mean, one of the things, first of all, I think it's a time of recharging, but it's also a deep, I mean, Abraham Heschel wrote the best book on the Sabbath I've ever read. And he reminds us that the Sabbath is not an interlude. It's not just instrumental, it's the climax of living. So I want us to also see it as, yes, it does help recharge us, right? It's designed like give it a rest, right? But it's also designed to be that special space of delight and beauty and relationships and joy. As Lewis would say, it's the scent of the flower not yet seen, right? It's just the appetizer. It's Edenic in the past. We remember where we've come from. It's a taste of Eden, but it's a foretaste of what is to come in Jesus. So it's the scent of a flower not yet seen, a city not yet visited, right? It's Lewis's language of inconsolable longing. So we say that Sabbath itself is meant to be enticing, deepening, beautiful. And how you do that, I know we need to get practical here a little bit, but like how you begin to do that, I think requires, first of all, a deep sense of understanding what it is and what it's for. So you guard against legalism, you guard against heavy rule keeping, you get the big picture of why, and then it's deeply relational with God and with others. And it's deeply about beauty, and it's deeply about slowing down and delighting in being, and not just contribution, consumption, and productivity. So these are the biggest principles. You apply it, of course, case is going to be different for a season with 3 small kids versus an empty nester. But I do think there are principles that, first of all, how are you taking baby steps to make one day of your week distinct that is not about productivity, it's not about consumption.
And by that, you mean work productivity for your job.
Yes.
Maybe that rest and renewal is going out to your carpentry shop.
It may well
working
be.
in your garden. Yeah, it may have product as a part of it, but it's about the act itself, not necessarily the outcome.
Yes, I think so. And I think the biggest thing I want to encourage people is that however you carve out your Sabbath day, it's a time for deepening intimacy with God and deepening intimacy with those you love. And I would say also your faith community. So I see it as deeply tied to beauty. And maybe that in the garden, you're just in nature, that the beauty of God's design. Because it seems to me when we do Sabbath, we cease from our work to focus on God's work, just like God focused on his when he rested. So creation, how do you immerse yourself in beauty and creation? To focus on God's work, but not only creation, but redemption in Jesus, right? And his future place he's going to make for us in heaven one day. So I think the principles have to guide us, and then we have freedom. Like, how do we make this day around those realities? And then technology, yes. Some of that technology you got to at least minimize a great deal because that's distracting and you need time for attentiveness.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, there's much more we could talk about. I know that. But
Well, I'm very grateful for a friend in my life, Brett Allen. He's our minister of family life at the church, and just has taught me so much about Sabbath. And when you say the word consumption there, stepping away from Amazon, stepping away from I need to spend or I have to spend because so much of our life is about spending. I was moved recently with a report about how children 4 and 5 years old know how to open a parent's phone, go to Amazon and pick something out. And like, wow, we're training them young, aren't we?
We are.
And
I think many people, again, not in a rigid way, but really eliminate almost all screen time on that day. Whether it's, a phone's put in a drawer. If there's an emergency, but like to eliminate a lot of the screen time. So you have incarnational, relational time with God and others.
Yeah, my son and I talked about that on the phone this morning, about the phones driving into school this morning. And I said, look, I'm just as guilty as you. So we're going to make some good commitments and hold each other accountable.
Wonderful.
And that's a good thing. Well, so Sabbath, this issue in our modern world that needs to be rethought. You've done that. You also, in your book, look at the whole change we've experienced since COVID in working remotely or hybrid setups. We don't see our coworkers as much face-to-face. Just this week, JP Morgan Chase is opening a brand new skyscraper in Manhattan. And with it, they are calling all their workers back. That we've built this and we want everybody here face to face. So talk to us about like physical distance and how that affects our ability to really understand and bear witness to the people we work with.
Yeah, I'm not an expert at this. I have had lots of conversations with a lot of people in different vocations on this. So a couple of things I would simply say, principle wise, I'm not surprised, not that I have some great insight, that there's more of a movement after COVID for a while to have more incarnational combination, whether it's hybrid or in office every day. I'm not surprised from a creation standpoint because we are not only people of time, we are a people of space and place. And so I think there are things that can be accomplished remotely with technology. It can be a gift, but it's driven mainly by efficiency rather than incarnational proximity. And so I think you have to have a little bit of tension there as a Christian. Like there's an incredible goodness of incarnation, proximity, face to face, embodied, indwelling relationship, whether it's nurturing a culture in a corporation, whether it's creative innovation. It doesn't mean that it's nothing can be done through technology like this, but I do think we need to be very discerning about the idolatry of efficiency and continue to watch that. Like AI, I just had this conversation this morning. AI, there's lots of debate about AI, but one of the pushbacks of AI is its potential loss of certain incarnational aspects of human creativity and so forth. So I think remote work can be really a blessing. I think of its flexibility for many people, stay-at-home spouses, gig kind of things you can do. But I think the deepening aspect of our relational being requires more and more intentionality around incarnational community.
After COVID, or maybe through it, but afterwards, how did you lead your staff in their work placement?
Well, after COVID, in COVID, we were all scrambling, trying to figure out how to do this with what limitations we had. Pretty quickly, we realized that yes, it would be an exception if we did remote work because we are all in Christ community, unlike maybe we're all in the same city.
Right.
So
you have several campuses.
We have several campuses, but we meet together in a common location. We supplement that if someone's ill, if there's some particular circumstance like a stay-at-home spouse with a sick child. Certainly people can come in on Zoom or on a platform, but we make a priority incarnational. And we did it pretty quickly. We want to be sensitive to people concerned about sickness and so forth of COVID, but we're deeply committed to that. And for us, we also saw our online presence as not primarily another community that is a substitute from incarnational Sunday morning. And I'm not making criticisms of anybody else, but as an option for those who couldn't be here on Sunday morning to participate some in the worship service. So we've moved very much non-remote incarnational, made to Flourish. We have some remote employees, but literally this week, all of them are in town, Kansas City, spending a week together. So there's probably a good combination, but we need to value community. We need to value relationships. We need to value the embodiment of people and place. And I think that's a plus for the Christian church and for Christians to really value.
The temptation is to cheapen it, like you say, for the idol of efficiency.
Yes.
I do some consulting with churches, and I was with some leaders who, one raised the prospect of let's turn off our online worship and, hey, maybe find a login element for the homebound or the rare person that travels. Well, not the rare person. There's a lot that travels, but let's don't enable our people to disembody their faith. And that really, a silence fell over the room with that one.
Well, I know I have friends that do more of that and see this as a strategic outreach across the country. But I do think, for us, that's how we've approached it as one local church trying to live out our mission and affirm the goodness of incarnational community. We think the local church, that's one of the greatest things we add to our culture right now is the importance of incarnational connection when we know that loneliness and mental health is at the highest level. The local church is not just an information figurehead to the world. We have good information and truth, right? We want to get that out, but we're a community. So we've moved more that way. I'm not saying that's all right, but we really believe that's important. I think that's true in the workplace. So I tend to, want to at least move to hybrid, if not encourage more and more face-to encounter. I think there's greater innovation, greater creativity, greater cultural transformation. And so I think there are lots of reasons why we should be less focused on pure remote and at least allow some hybrid and encourage more and more face-to-face.
Well, the statistics show, and even sociological studies, that
Yeah.
an individual who's rooted in a faith community has a much higher quality of life, even longer
Indeed.
life.
Indeed.
And it's that life-on-life engagement that keeps you engaged, keeps you growing. The ups and downs of emotions and conversation and relationship keep you healthy.
Yeah.
Now, you hit AI just a moment ago.
Yeah.
And wow, that's certainly a big topic on everybody's lips right now. Tell us a bit more about what your research showed and what you're thinking in the AI direction with our faith.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to say I'm not an expert in this at all. I did do some of it in the new book. I tried to glean the best wisdom from very smart people. That is a constant, it's growing and changing every day. So when you put your words down in a book, it's frozen in time. So I just want to make that disclaimer. I think a few things we need to think through. I'm not saying I'm a Luddite, but I do think we need to have some caution on AI. And let me just give you the environmental one. That's not usually talked about, but we know more and more the massive amount of power,
Huge.
electrical, how it's changing that. And I'm just saying that's a factor. And that's not left or right. Very smart people are saying the amount of electrical power and fossil fuels and whatever power, nuclear power to do this is growing really fast. So I just think that's practically like, what does that mean for us as a society and for the environment? And again, I'm not making any political statement. I'm just saying I don't hear about that. I think I read more for the book about the existential challenges of AI taking over, what it empowers one individual in a garage in LA to do. It would destroy the world kind of thing. They're very smart people concerned about the potential existential crisis with AI. Having said that, I do see some real efficiency pieces, like in, how do you manage things? It's a good research assistant sometimes for certain things. But I also, and this is true in more of the creatives and intellectual property, there's a lot of concern about what AI is doing in what plagiarism is, what open source is. So anyway, I have concerns about intellectual property, about the creative parts of this, human parts of creativity. And so I do have some concerns about it. So we need to navigate it carefully. I think we should have policies for it. Like how do we navigate it the best we can as an organization? We're doing that as a church. How does it relate to sermon preparation? How does it relate to doing an email? How does it relate to policy formulation? We're not there yet, but I do think we need to try to have some guidelines for it.
I often use ChatGPT to list out 3 or 4 scriptures that I'm looking at one time, or even reading aloud. When we do our Formed for Faithfulness podcast, I read 3 scriptures over the course of that episode. And so I would put those in and it would pull them up. Well, and I use the NIV translation. Well, this week I was doing some recording and I put in the scriptures in NIV and it came up and it said, sorry, that is copyright protected. The King James is not, so I'll give you those.
Okay. Well, I appreciate them.
And I thought, well, now there's a change. There's a change.
Yeah. I find in different vocations, when your listeners have different vocations, I find a much more openness to the efficiency and the help in a lot of business contexts for policy formulation, for strategy. I find large pushback against this from many creative vocational callings, artists, writers, because of some of that potential. So I think just share that as well.
Well, as a father, my heart has been heavy. I have a daughter, sophomore in college, son, freshman in college, and a 7th grader. And I was helping my freshman son edit one of his papers. And he's working so hard and he's trying. And I thought, how many just do the AI thing and don't go through this struggle and this learning, and how unfair that is for him. And then I'm on the other end working with my 7th grader who's just now learning to put an argument together and form a paragraph. And these are good growing pains I want for them. And yet I can imagine that they're in school and they watch their peers just punch these things away in an AI module. And it's It's different.
We need discernment. Boy, we do that as a culture. We need discernment, but as individual followers of Jesus, we do. And
And I want Christians at the forefront of the technology
right.
who are shaping ethical foundations now that will perhaps last for generations. That's, to me, one of the reasons why we have to help integrate faith and work. Well, you have certainly been a leading voice in the faith and work movement and a leading organizer and doer through Made to Flourish and otherwise. I'm curious now. I mean, I've been in this space for, well, we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary with Collaborative. Woohoo!
Wonderful. Congratulations.
And I'm curious your take on where is the movement overall and where do you see it going next?
Yeah. A couple thoughts I have. I don't know if it's great wisdom. I do think we've moved from what I call me to we. In the earlier days, so much of the faith and work conversation was about my fulfillment, my work. And I still think that's really good, but I think we've moved to also the implications of our collective work, and that's which deals with economics. And we talk a lot about faith work and economics, of giving access, of dealing with disparities in wealth and building capacity. And I just think there's more of an economic realization that this collective conversation is more than just my work. It's how our work brings human flourishing. And again, the economics of neighbor love came out of that movement to try to move it from just what I call me to we. I do think right now I'm most encouraged by the work around more about understanding human well-being, both as a worker and as a rester. I may use that language. And I think particularly important right now is the conversation with Kurt Thompson and others in interpersonal neurobiology, that we're beginning to understand more about human well-being and how we are neurologically wired and how relationships are really important in collaboration for healing, creativity, beauty. So I think that's where I'm spending more time thinking about not only my work on Monday, but what does it mean to be a flourishing worker or a human being? And what does interpersonal neurobiology and neuroscience help me in understanding what it means to be known and to know others? It's deeply relational. And I'm not pushing back against technology and strategy, and these things are a part of our workplace. But we're learning more and more how deeply relational we are, both for creativity, innovation, for healing, for wholeness, the mirror neuron, so forth. So I'm hoping that in this movement, there's more of a sense of not just work has meaning, which is huge from a Viktor Frankl standpoint, and goodness and challenges, of course, but how do we flourish in our work? And how does that relate to how we are wired in community? The other thing I would say, we just talked about that, is I'm doing much more to think about the importance of work and rest rhythms, which is really bringing back a weekly Sabbath, the importance of it. And I do think it is beautiful in itself for human flourishing, but I think my sense is God's design also on those 6 days, if we are doing a one-day true rest, it's going to profoundly impact those 6 days and our joy, our creativity and energy. We don't do it just for that, but I'm going to spend more time. And I think more of us are thinking about how rest and work are really important to talk together more. And I probably didn't do enough in my early days to talk about rest. So I think the movement needs to talk more about wholeness, well-being, mental health, wholeness, and how that's a reality in the Monday world, or how you help nourish a culture of more wholeness and flourishing in your workplace and the values and so forth.
I have been a little tired the last couple of years of hearing a lot of the same topics discussed again and again, and have been asking myself, okay, what's next? What are the new horizons that need to be explored through this work? And so I appreciate those that you've shared. I also bring to attention Reformed Theological Seminary in Orlando's Institute for Faith, Work, and Culture. Have you come across their work?
I have, yes.
It's
good
Damian
work.
Cheater.
Yes, I know
And
Damian.
he has
Good work.
a TEDS PhD, Trinity Evangelical,
Yes.
your alma mater. And he is leaning in with deep theologians to work theologically through a lot of the foundational doctrines that relate to the faith and work conversation, and sort of kind of going back and filling in the foundations and the gaps, but with the aim towards the practitioners in the space, so that we then can be better equipped as we reach out to the larger population. Their work is pretty dense, pretty heavy academic-wise, and so it wouldn't be for the broadest of audiences. But for someone like me and my peers, it really feeds the soul, it feeds the mind, that I think makes our teaching all the more rich.
Yeah, it's such a deep well. I mean, that was part of my confession, because even though I'd studied theology and systematics, I didn't have and I'm constantly learning, the level of robust theology, biblical theology, that is the foundation of this conversation. So I am excited about more of that, and I think it's very rich. And the new book has more. It's more robust, but it's very accessible on the theological foundations. I'm very encouraged by their work.
Tom, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's a joy to be with you.
And so want to encourage everyone to check out Why Your Work Matters, How God Uses Our Everyday Vocations to Transform Us, Our Neighbors, and the World. Well, friends, thank you for joining us. Remember, like, share, leave a comment. Really helps us to get the word out. Go to wecolabor.com for all sorts of content, our website. Give us your email and we'll send you a 31-day faith and work prompt journal. Glad to send it to your snail mailbox if you give us an email. You can find us across all the social media platforms. Don't forget our weekly 10-minute devotional for the working Christian called Formed for Faithfulness. It follows the liturgical calendar and helps equip one for the day-to-day. I want to thank our sponsor for today, the Magruder Foundation. I'm Case Thorpe, and God's blessings on you.